Maggie and Josh were newlyweds, starting a new life in Western Canada and driving cross-country to their new home. It would be a voyage of discovery, both physically and emotionally. Their route would take them through several American states, including Michigan, where they drove across the magnificent 26,000-foot-long Mackinac Bridge above Lakes Michigan and Huron, to reach the dark expanse of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, home of the Lougarou, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Dogman, and Bigfoot. It was a grey, gloomy, overcast day, but their spirits were high. Hey, it was an adventure. Still, after half an hour of grey sky, grey road, and miles of dark green/black fir trees, they began to feel a certain depression of the spirit. It was a little too dark, a little too lonely, and they hadn't seen a soul or even another vehicle in miles. And then they came to the Detour. Josh, who was driving, was annoyed. While the scenery was tedious, he liked the fact that Highway 2 was one straight line all the way to their new home. They didn't have to think, just drive. Until now. "I hope this doesn't go on long," Josh complained, but Maggie, who was half asleep, merely said, "It's an adventure." Alas, Josh's wishes were not to be granted. They were diverted onto a side road with the ominous name of Route 13 and began driving and driving. Route 13 was 2 lanes of asphalt, bordered on both sides by dark walls of fir trees. Maggie and Josh felt like they were passing through the heart of a primeval forest. They could see nothing but trees, no houses, no people, and no cars. And if that wasn't enough, it began to rain. Not hard, just a cold, dull, grey drizzle. If that wasn't so creepy after around 15 minutes, Maggie said, "Are we on the right road?" Unfortunately for them, they were driving an older car Josh had inherited. It didn't have GPS and their cell phones weren't working. "The detour signs led here," Josh answered shortly. "I'm not criticizing, honey," Maggie said quietly. "It's just, where is everyone?" "Well, we could turn around and go back, but then we would have wasted, 15 or 20 minutes? I think we should tough it out and keep going." And so they continued, and were soon relieved to see several buildings alongside the road. Maggie, who was firmly convinced men never asked directions, told Josh to stop and ask if they were on the right road. He was more than willing to comply, if only to stop and clear his head. They pulled in front of what appeared to have been a gas station/convenience store. Had been, for it was clearly abandoned. Across the road was a diner, equally derelict. They noticed the door to the diner was ajar, so they stepped across the road looking both ways for traffic, which, in retrospect, seemed rather ridiculous, and happy to be out of the rain, tentatively opened the glass door. "Hello?" Josh called in an equally tentative voice, but there was no answer. There was no one there. But the diner seemed more closed than abandoned. Maggie noticed all the tables were set, waiting for hungry people to sit down and eat. But there was no one to serve them, no cooks, no waitstaff, and no other customers. It was downright creepy, and the fact the place was spotless made it even worse. "It looks like they just opened for breakfast," Josh said, realizing he'd automatically lowered his voice without being aware of it. "I'm gonna look him back." "Hurry back," Maggie said, her voice little more than a whisper. She made to follow Josh, but something, fear, confusion, whatever it was, held her back. Instead, she moved closer to the glass door, and looking out, screamed. Josh came out of the back room yelling and asking what was wrong. Maggie answered by pointing through the glass. 2 figures stood on the road in front of the abandoned restaurant. A boy and a young girl, dressed identically in black jeans, black high-top sneakers, black hoodies pulled low over their faces, and they appeared to be staring at the wet ground. "Where did they come from?" Josh said, to which Maggie replied, "I don't know." "Well, they're just kids. Come on, let's see if they can tell us anything." They left the derelict diner and walked over to the kids, who stood, heads lowered, silent and still. It was all a little unnerving. Hi?" Josh said, but received no reply. "Where is everyone?" "Are you guys okay?" Maggie inquired. No response still. It turned into a long, pregnant pause. Josh and Maggie stood, unsure of what to do next, when the older kid, the boy, said, "Please, sir, will you give us a ride?" "Sure, but where is everyone?" The young boy ignored Josh's question but repeated, "Please, sir, will you give us a ride?" "Okay, but where do you want to go?" He was suddenly overwhelmed by an intense wave of icy fear, so violent it took his breath away, and on top of it, he noticed that the black clothing of these strange kids was completely dry, even though they had been standing out in the rain. Turning towards Maggie, he whispered, "Get in the car." "What?" "Get in the car," Josh repeated. "But why?" "Get in the damn car," Josh said, raising his voice. And in that instant, the two strange kids raised their head. Both kids had pale, bloodless faces, but it was their eyes that riveted attention. Black eyes, gleaming Stygian pools, which seemed to radiate darkness and to hypnotize. Maggie shrieked aloud, but her scream failed to drown out the young boy as he called, "Give us a ride, Josh." Maggie got in the car. Josh's hands shook so badly, he struggled to turn the key in the ignition, and when he finally did manage to turn it on, the engine failed to catch. Frantically, he turned the key again and again, but it was as if the car was without power, and as they sat there totally immobile, the dead white faces appeared at their window. "Please, Josh. Please, Maggie. Give us a ride. We want to go home." Josh kept turning the key, but nothing happened. "Please, Josh. Please, Maggie." And they began tapping on the window. Maggie noticed their fingernails were painted black. Suddenly the engine caught, and the car slammed forward, throwing Maggie back against the seat. Josh put pedal to metal and kept accelerating until the car was hurtling down the slick, wet roads at over 100 miles an hour. For once, Maggie didn't tell him to slow down. She just wanted to get away from those kids. They found themselves back amongst the endless fir trees. It was darker, and the rain had increased, and Josh found it necessary to turn on his headlights. Maggie was shivering uncontrollably. "Those kids?" she began, her voice little more than a whisper. "Yeah, those were the black-eyed kids," Josh answered. "What are they? Demons? Are they demons?" "I don't know," Josh said, his voice rising. "Maybe they're aliens. I don't know. All I know is that they're bad." They drove on through the gathering gloom in silence. After a few minutes, Maggie switched on the radio, if only to dispel the fearful quiet. But she was rewarded with a squall of such agonizingly high-pitched static, she killed it before Josh could yell to turn it off. They continued on without a word for a few more minutes when Maggie finally whispered, "Josh?" "What?" he said, then lowered his voice to normal. "What is it, babe?" "I think something's following us." Josh took a quick glance to both sides of the road, but all he could see was the dark mass of fir and deciduous trees. "I don't see anything." "Something's moving through the trees. I can see them moving." "It must be the wind." "Josh, the rain is coming straight down. It isn't windy." Josh took his foot off the gas and let the car slow. Looking towards the trees, he could see movement, but he couldn't see what was causing it. The trees shook violently, as if something large was crashing through them, something just out of sight. Josh floored it again, in an attempt to get away, but whatever it was kept pace. They drove in petrified silence for another 15 minutes, when they both noticed a light on the horizon. Perhaps the storm was ending, the overcast breaking up. They rounded a bend on the road and Josh hit the brakes so hard, the car slid to the side, almost ending up in the ditch. The kids were standing in the middle of the road. Maggie screamed as whatever was following them through the underbrush drew closer, shaking the branches of the encroaching trees. Josh tried to steer around the kids, but then a strange thing happened. They seemed to melt, then flow across the road, only to materialize right in front of the car, forcing him to stop. "Josh," Maggie cried, "the thing's in the trees." He threw the car into reverse. Then, as quickly as he could, he turned around and started driving back the way they came. Maggie was shivering with fear and kept asking Josh what he was doing, and was equally terrified. He kept repeating that he didn't know what to do, that he just wanted to get away, to get back to where the detour started if they could. If. On a lonely road without streetlights, surrounded by dense, green-black forest, it didn't take long for the darkness to take control. Josh switched on his high beams, and several times throughout he thought he saw reflections, green, red, yellow, eyes, regarding them from the underbrush. Suddenly Maggie broke the silence. "It's getting light up ahead. We're probably back at that place with the diner," Josh said, his voice tense. "I hope those kids are gone," Maggie wailed as she began to cry. Josh noticed that the light up ahead was getting brighter, impossibly bright. There had only been a few derelict buildings there, maybe a street lamp. But now this cold white light was so bright it began to harm his eyes. It began to blind him. Instinctively he slowed down and hit the two kids, their dark bodies flying across the hood and smacking the windshield. Josh slammed on the brakes, and they were engulfed by a wave of intense blue-white light that pulsated like a beating heart. At first they couldn't see, but when the bright light subsided, they saw the buildings from earlier. The abandoned gas station, the derelict diner, were all gone, and in their place was a huge oval structure, radiating an intense blue-white light in front of a dark, gaping maw, from which came tendrils of creeping mist. The glowing saucer blocked the road, and standing on the road before it were figures. Some appeared human, of the redneck variety, while others were state troopers with their wide-brimmed hats. But most were very strange. Groups of black-eyed kids stood motionless, all of them dressed in identical black clothing, black hoodies, black jeans, black high-topped sneakers. But standing by one pair, the kids that had confronted Josh and Maggie, the very same that they had just run over, was an adult, wearing a dark trench coat, his shadowy head crowned by a fedora. Moving among the crowd were a number of grey aliens, assisted by normal-looking scientists in white lab coats, while off to the side stood a giant humanoid covered with hair, a monster caveman. Josh and Maggie had stepped from the car, unaware they had done so. The two kids from earlier approached them in unison. "Welcome home." The boy reached out and took Josh's hand, while the girl took Maggie's, and all together they walked hand in hand into the dark interior of the glowing saucer. A flash of intense white light. Josh and Maggie were heading west on Highway 2, on their honeymoon and heading for a new life. What happened to the Detour? Maggie said in confusion, finding it hard to speak, as if her thoughts and words were under some form of mental constraint. Huh? Josh grunted, which ended all discussion. But they hadn't gone far when Josh saw the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Oh, I wasn't even speeding, what the hell? He pulled to the side of the road and rolled down his window as the trooper approached. Can I see your license and registration, please? Josh shut off the ignition and handed over the requested documents and asked, Is there something wrong, officer? The trooper read Josh's name off the license and said, Is this your wife? Yes, sir. Is there something wrong? Where have you folks been hiding? Hiding? I don't get it. You folks have been missing for 3 weeks. He said it plainly, but Josh shouted, 3 weeks? What day is it? June 10th. June 10th. And they had left Ontario on May 9th, entering Michigan that same day. Where had they been? Josh, do you remember the Detour? Maggie said, her voice shrill as if she had trouble getting the words out. Detour? No, I don't remember any Detour. We've always been on Highway 2, ever since we crossed the MacLeod Bridge. The trooper was suspicious. Josh and Maggie upset. How could they have been missing for 3 weeks? They hadn't been travelling on Highway 2 for more than 3 hours. But in the end, everyone was just happy they were found, and in their intense relief, their disappearance was soon forgotten. Yes, Josh's boss had been annoyed when Josh hadn't shown up, but he got over it. He'd been young once too, and it was their honeymoon. So Maggie and Josh settled into their new life and forgot all about it. For they soon had other things to think about. Joyous things indeed. Maggie was pregnant. Maggie was intensely happy, but in spite of the warm glow of happiness that engulfed her, there were times she felt, well, uneasy. She had strange dreams of travelling through thick woods, of racing down wet roads under overcast skies. She dreamed of people, strange dwarfish beings. Were they children? And in some dreams, or were they nightmares, Maggie saw a huge chamber filled with strobing blue-white lights. She was strapped to an operating table completely naked when a large metallic thing came down on her. One night, she awoke from one of these nightmares to find 2 figures standing at the foot of her bed. They appeared to be a young boy and girl, dressed identically in black. Brother and sister? She could see their dead, chalk-white faces, with 2 pools of Stygian black where their eyes should be, and they were smiling. Sleep well, dear Maggie. We can hardly wait for the birth of our new little brother.